proposition has argued that publishers are morally complicit when they distribute offensive content, that private ethical judgment is not censorship, and that deeply offensive literature causes genuine harm to its targets. The opposition, however, has argued that deeply offensive is not an objective category, that handing publishers a moral obligation to refuse gives unchecked power to private gatekeepers, and that the remedy for offensive speech is more speech, not suppression. With that, my reply. Here's the story of today's debate. Both sides agree publishers should be thoughtful. The only question is whether thoughtfulness becomes an obligation, and the opposition wins that question with a decisive no. Now, the proposition came into today's debate with a genuine moral intuition that content is so harmful, so dehumanizing, that the people with the power to stop spreading it have a duty to do so. And in a world with real hate speech and real communities targeted by words that were published and celebrated, that intuition isn't entirely wrong, and the opposition understands it. But good intentions and good policy are not the same thing, and the gap between them is where this debate is decided. Their case rests on one claim, that publishers can be trusted to draw the line carefully. That's not an argument, that's hope. James Baldwin was told his work was offensive. Toni Morrison's books are still being pulled from shelves today by people who genuinely believe they are acting morally. Every generation has gatekeepers certain they knew where the line was, and every generation has coincidentally been wrong. The opposition told you two things the proposition never answered. First, that deeply offensive is a political category, not an objective one, and there is no neutral definition. Whoever writes the standard holds enormous power over what ideas circulate, and handing that power to publishers as a moral obligation is equivalent to handing it to private actors with no accountability to the public they directly affect. Second, that the historical record is evidence, not hypothetical. Right now, more books are being banned from schools and libraries in the United States than at any given point in recorded history. Animal Farm, The Catcher in the Rye, The Hate You Give, books about the Holocaust, books about slavery, and books that give language to experiences the powerful would rather not discuss. Every single one of those books was pulled by someone who genuinely believed they were acting on a moral obligation to protect their community. That's not a slippery slope. It's the proposition's world that is already happening. So here's how to weigh it. The proposition's world rests entirely on trusting the gatekeeper to get it right, and we have shown you throughout history and current actions that gatekeepers never get it right. They get it wrong in very predictable ways, against the voices that challenge power, against the literature of the marginalized, and against the books that make the comfortable uncomfortable. The content that gets labeled deeply offensive is rarely content that punches down. In fact, it's almost always content that punches up. Now, the opposition's world is admittedly messier, but it's the world where no single private actor decides what ideas the public gets to access, where James Baldwin and Toni Morrison survive. Not because everyone agreed they were harmless, but because no one had the power to declare them otherwise. Free expression does not need a guardian. It needs room, and the proposition's obligation removes that room entirely. The difference between a publisher choosing not to distribute something and a publisher being morally obligated to refuse it is the very difference between judgment and duty itself. Judgment is personal, contextual, and revisable because it can be wrong and it can be corrected. Duty, however, is categorical. Once it exists, it does not bend. And when duty becomes the standard, the books that disappear are never the ones that needed to go. They are the ones that needed to stay. It is on that basis that we are so incredibly proud to oppose.